Let's talk about one of the worst pieces of art advice you'll probably hear from any artist. And that, of course, is, if you've read the title, don't use the airbrush. I don't know where this idea that using the airbrush was bad came from, but it's just bad advice, and I think it's about time I just get over with and make a tutorial, because I wanted to make tutorial videos. I mean, I've been asked to make tutorial videos, so hey, let's just talk about how to render properly with the airbrush tool. Okay, so let's say you have your art, you have your base layer, all your base colors are down, and now you want to render. How do you do that? You want to do those cool, smooth 3D drawings in 2D, but people tell you not to use the airbrush. But also, when you use the smudge tool, the blur tool, it just doesn't look right. It doesn't blend enough, or it's just not enough, but you keep being told, hey, don't use the airbrush. So what do you do? How are you supposed to make that cool art if you can't even use the tool you're supposed to use? Just use it. Again, these are simple rules that people make up that just stems from their lack of understanding of how to do something. You can do anything and get better at it with your own practice. These people just didn't want to practice or learn how to use the tool properly. So I'm just going to explain to you how to use it without it looking dirty, blurry, or just bad in general. Because while I'm no pro, I'd say I'm relatively good at using the airbrush, given the fact that I use it so frequently in my own art. This video is specifically talking about semi-realism in a sort of cartoony way, but if you want me to explain how to use the airbrush tool in normal anime art, I will happily talk about that. I do have a video, a YouTube short up that kind of briefly talks about how I render my anime art using, and it has me using the airbrush tool, so you can go watch that, or I can make a little tutorial on how to use the airbrush tool in simple art like that. Anyway, let's get into the actual explanation. So here, I just quickly drew a face and then used the symmetry tool because I'm lazy. Here you have a head, okay? You want to render this head, this bald head. Let's talk about how to do that. Now, a lot of beginner artists put the airbrush and will use it to render the borders of the face, which isn't wrong. That is the first step. But a lot of these artists will just stop at one stroke or they'll do it wrong or skip other steps. They just brush over the other steps and think, oh, well, it's not going to get better than this. It is not wrong to do the border. In fact, that is the first step I'll typically do when rendering using the airbrush. I will add the border to the face. So you just want to go over that until it's darker at the edges of the face, then like blends out and mixes into the skin color. If it's not blending the way you want it to, select the skin color, lower the opacity of your airbrush, and go over the shadows. That way it won't look too dark, but it'll still blend out nicely. Once you've gotten this base level of rendering down, you can move on. You can move on to the next step. You can stay there if you just want a very simplistic rendering style for your cartoon art. If you want to go a little bit more in depth, lean more into the semi-realism, then you want to render the eye sockets, the nose, and maybe a bit under the mouth. That's it. That is all you want to do for the face. It is that simple, and you just want to keep blending it out until it looks the way you want it to look. Then of course you can render the eyes, which is literally just a sphere, just render a sphere. That's very simple, and literally that is it. That is it for the face. That is all you have to do. That's all I do. It's harder to go for the hair, so I'd use a different brush for hair. Like I'd say the airbrush is a little bit too soft, and I think something that throws a lot of people off in rendering with the airbrush is that they don't know the difference, or they aren't fully realizing that this first step isn't your lighting, it's you adding depth to your art. The depth to your art is the most important part. I'd say if you want to go for semi-realism, the shading, the lighting, that just pulls it together. That just adds more. That just adds a spice to it. Giving your art depth in terms of semi-realism is the first most important thing to do, obviously, because you're trying to go for semi-realistic. If you're not trying to go for semi-realistic, it doesn't entirely matter. You can actually apply the same logic for rendering faces to literally any other part of the body, as long as you're able to break down these parts of the body into different shapes. For example, if you look up a reference image of a muscular body, recently I drew my OC and he was like posing, he's muscular, he's wearing like a backless shirt, and because I wanted to practice rendering the muscles on the back, because I never do that. And so I literally just broke it down into the basic shapes. Like, you don't even literally have to break it down, you just have to visualize it, look at your reference, see what shapes are there, and then render those shapes as if they were spheres, but instead of making the really dark like edges as if the sphere were to end, it's almost like you put a blanket over it. The skin is like a blanket over the muscles, and so you just want to lighten the rendering so it doesn't look entirely 3D, or that will end up looking a little weird. You can pretty much use the airbrush anywhere where there's soft edges. For like an arm, if it's like an unmuscular arm or a muscular arm, you can pretty much use the airbrush anywhere with some kind of soft living organism. Your rendering won't necessarily look right before you've added lighting. Of course, because lighting, okay, so this is pretty much just the step you take to make your character 3D. It is not the step you take to bring your character to life per se. The lighting is what brings everything together, it's what ties it together, which is why I'd say lighting and adding dimension are the two most important parts of your art. It doesn't matter about the background helps, but you can absolutely make good art without a background, because it just takes lighting and good dimension to make a decent piece of art. I'd say most of your time will go into this process. It takes me around 6 hours to do 2 characters drawn in this style, but it's fun. It's actually quite relaxing. It sounds like, oh my god, I don't want to draw for 6 hours straight, but it is actually like relaxing and it's a fun pastime. And I'd say if you're looking for a relaxing thing to do and still make really good art, then I'd say use the airbrush. Don't bother trying to tediously blend out the art with various different watercolor brushes that just aren't doing it right. They leave too many streaks, it doesn't look right, and you just don't like how it looks. Don't bother with that just because people are telling you not to use the airbrush tool. Just learn how to use the airbrush tool, because at the end of the day, it is a shortcut. The airbrush tool is the best tool you can use for giving your character dimension. Dimension is the most important part of your art next to lighting. That's just how, if you want your semi-realism to be semi-realistic, use the airbrush. Obviously there are certain art styles like the, what's it called? The one with Jinx in it. What is that? Something Legends? I think. League of Legends? I don't know. I know that's a game. I have no idea. I haven't watched the show. But with an art style like that, that could be considered semi-realism, absolutely, but it's more stylized. So, you know, whenever you're watching tutorials, don't watch tutorials from people who don't have an art style you want. If someone's art style doesn't look anything like the type of art you like, don't watch their tutorials, because then you're just going to end up getting an art style you don't personally like. Obviously you can take some advice from it, because, you know, if they still have good rendering quality, then take some of their advice, but don't fully listen to them. Like, I like Sam Does Art. He has some helpful tips, but I don't like his art style. I like how it looks, but I don't like how it looks. So while I do follow some of his advice, I don't follow advice like don't draw individual eyelashes or don't draw individual strands of hair. Obviously you don't want to draw individual strands of hair, that'll make your art look messy, but that's not necessarily, like, not all your art has to be drawn in big blobs. Like, you can add dimension to hair without it being bad because it's individual strands, you know? You can take advice from artists who have good quality art, but you have to be careful about what advice you're taking. If you don't like my semi-realistic art style for its rendering for the airbrush tool, don't take my advice on using the airbrush tool. Don't take the advice in this video, because then you're not going to end up liking your own art. You want to focus on art you like. Aim for an art style you want, not for an art style other people like. Unless, of course, you're only making art for the people to like. You've just figure out what you want from your art, what you like about your art, what you don't like about your art, what you like about other people's art, what you don't like about other people's art, and use that and compile all of that to make your own art style. That is how art styles are created. And that's honestly the best advice I can give, next to don't listen to people who say don't use the airbrush tool.